Redbird Reboot Podcast. Are you ready to get rebooted, Cardinals fans? He settles down, at least in the zone, and does not stop running.
Blake Murphy.
This is the identity for the Arizona Cardinals.
The run defense is just horrendous, and it's been horrendous for the Cardinals for a long time.
And Marcos Labrada.
He's going to bring over his philosophy. It should make it better.
Present the hottest NFL podcast from the country's hottest state.
He should be turning around the logo.
Actually, some breaking news we can cover here. This popped up just about, 6 minutes ago.
It's Redbird Reboot.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans. Welcome in. This is the Redbird Reboot Podcast. I'm Blake Murphy 7, joined, of course, by my co-host Marcos Labrada at Pancakes Soul. Marcos, the season is over. The NFL divisional rounds are starting tomorrow, but the Arizona Cardinals offseason is already in full swing. We have head coaching candidates who are taking interviews. We have players, at least, who are kind of gotten their locker rooms cleared out, and we've got to now kind of go back and look at the season, assign a few grades, and then talk about which Cardinals players we want to keep, which Cardinals players Cardinals should probably make an offer to, see at least if they're going to stick around, so kind of the extend, keep, or let and cut bait, see how they will catch on with a different team for the most part. Before we get started going over this, how are you doing tonight as Cardinals fans? We've now had a full week at least without Cardinals football. How are you doing, at least in the midst of all of it, given the fact that this has already been a interesting sort of NFL playoff setup in terms of that there's not really anything that's gone surprising thus far?
Well, I'm a little bit pissed off about the fact that we had to host the Rams here. So that's something that I wish we wouldn't do often. But of course, us being neighborly as we always are, we did that with the 49ers. We let them come train in our building and play their games here. So obviously we're always going to extend the handout, but we're at the point where we should see our own Cardinals, hosting a playoff game because they're in the playoff game, not because divisional rival, the Los Angeles Rams and the Minnesota Vikings, which that was a shocker, but unfortunately it wasn't a shocker because, the Minnesota Vikings put a whooping on the Los Angeles Rams. No, the LA Rams oh my God, they put the whooping on them. So aside from that, I'm glad to be back in Arizona.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sam Darnold turned into a bit of what we've seen from Sam Darnold in the past. It's something that the Rams defense has really, over the last, I would say, month and a half, been completely dominant. And we saw in week 18, after playing the Lions, the following week, a lot of teams have usually struggled, especially teams' offensive lines with that level of physicality. Vikings themselves, game was pretty much over by the second quarter. We'll see, obviously, as like you mentioned, a lot of prayers out to those who are affected, at least in Los Angeles, everyone who's over there, at least who, there's going to be some people a part of the Bird Gang faithful. There's going to be others who are just going to have to kind of have all this terror that's happening, all of these lost homes, all these lost lives. Prayers definitely going out there. We'll see if the Rams win this week, if the game would be back in Los Angeles, or if there is a possibility, I suppose, depending on how the fires are, about how people are as far as for travel. My guess is it would be in LA, but there is an opportunity potentially for the NFC Championship game to go through Arizona, possibly, which I would not have foreseen coming in a million years. It just obviously would be under some more depressing circumstances. But Marcos, let's shift now to talking about our Arizona Cardinals. And one of the biggest things I think as we enter in this season is looking at rating the team. How did they do? Not just from like these Pro Football Focus grades. How did they do from as far as for what the expectation or standard was? Did they achieve that standard? Obviously, for everyone who's taking a test, your goal is always to be able to try to land in the A category. That's going to be that you exceed expectations, or if the expectations were high, you're able to meet those. B would, of course, be probably being able to do an above average job, while C would be getting the job done, but average. D would have to count as a failure, and F would have to count as a colossal failure. As far as, you're talking about the 2018 Arizona Cardinals quarterback room, when Sam Bradford went after 3 games, Josh Rosen, that's one of those catastrophic F failures that we saw. But let's go and kind of pop up a little bit first with some context. I know I talked last week with Joe Como of the Cardinal Rule, going over some of the Pro Football Focus grades. this is just kind of a good standpoint to figure out where the Cardinals stacked up amidst the rest of NFL teams. The offense was pretty highly graded. The defense was probably sub-average. Overall, they ended up being a little bit above average as a team. And I think for a lot of Cardinals fans, when you take a look at some of this, I don't think that it truly matches up with how some Cardinals fans would feel, because even though some of these grades are good, it does seem like that there were positive plays that were made against some bad teams. There were some good plays against some good teams, but for the most part, Cardinals really did not do anything that I would say would be worth, say, giving a B grade to on the season. I think that if you wanted to say they're a C grade, though, that's a little bit harsh. They were able to go out and win most of their games. Were up until the Panthers week competing for a playoff spot. I think that you take a look at this season somewhere between a C plus and a B minus as an overall grade for Arizona, which is a nice step up from a year ago. They were probably a D with the last 8 games of the season and Kyler Murray coming in, maybe making that a D plus, going 3-5 down the stretch. What are some of your thoughts on the overall team before we get into the positional group grades, Marcos?
Well, it's interesting because I'm looking at we're ranked sixth. That's actually not really shocking when it comes to the offense, but the defense definitely look better than what this ranking is. They're ranked 23rd by Pro Football Focus. Obviously, they do a grading system differently than just taking stats. They do a lot of they do it a lot through the grades, and to be on 23rd, it felt like, yeah, there were some games where the defense really did. They had a little bit of a like an off game and whatnot, but for the most part, we would all think that they overachieved. So to me, I think that 23rd should probably be higher for the defense, but it's gonna be what it's gonna be. And that's the one thing that popped out to me right off the bat is like 23rd. That's kind of like that's really really low. Um, and the fan base is always going to look at that the grades individually. They're going to say that the defense outperformed the offense last year, this past year, and the offense is ranked 6th, which means like that's elite. And then you have the defenses ranked in the bottom third, which is like, yeah, they were just a piss poor defense, but it just looked different in the eye test. So
Mm-hmm.
that's my takeaway from this. I mean, I'm not saying I don't trust it. Obviously they know more than I do, and they're gonna, they got, you know, whatever they're basing that on and whatnot. They have the justification for it. But I think for the Cardinals fans, that's how we feel. We just feel that way.
Yeah, the run game, at least, being able to average probably about, I think it was on offense this year, Cardinals rushed for about 144 yards per game, which ended up being good for, I believe, 7th overall in terms of rushing yards. The passing offense was not bad, but it was probably middle of the road, about, I think it was about 18th or so at 214 passing yards a game. It was not very lopsided as far as for either of those, but I do think that when you take a look at Arizona and their schedule, a good rushing attack made up for what was probably a difficult passing attack. You wanted the Cardinals to be top 10 in both, and unfortunately, they were not. On the defensive side, the total yards per game, Arizona was probably ranked around, I think it was 18th or 19th. Gave about 342 yards per game. The biggest difference, of course, Marcos, as far as for what was the saving grace. And the saving grace for them, at least, was points per game. They actually were at about, I want to say, I think it was, in terms of giving up, yeah, 15th. Sorry, I was looking on my screen right there. 15th in points allowed, which was good enough for them between the top 12 in points scored and top 15 to be able to be a playoff team. The biggest thing that was interesting was is that I think within both lenses, and these are just like pure statistics, Cardinals were pretty mid. A lot of what their schedule showed was that when they played good teams, they unfortunately were not able to go up with a win more often than not. When they came up against bad teams, they were actually able to trounce them pretty handily. That's one thing that I think was really cool to be able to watch if you're a Cardinals fan. There were some games that were a bit hard fought against future playoff teams, such as the Bills. They're able to beat up on what was an injured Rams team at the time, being able to compete against the Lions. But there's a couple of these games in here where they barely squeaked one out against the Niners, which may have been what I would say almost a season-saving sort of win when they were, looking hard at 1-4. followed by a complete letdown against the Packers getting blown out, they were able to come back with a nice 4-game win streak in the middle of the season, all against teams that, as we saw, one of them made the playoffs, one was contending at least up into the end in the Miami Dolphins for the playoffs, and two that ended up picking in the top 5 and top 10 of the NFL draft of the Jets and the Chicago Bears. At this point, Marcos, you're talking about a very middle of the road team at 6-4 with looking to be able to kind of get some things done. And then over the back half of the season, you had 3 losses in a row after 4 wins in a row. It kind of then turned into going 2-2 down the stretch where you needed to go 3-1 because of those losses. You win one game here against the Seahawks, Vikings. You probably are in, at least if not the playoff contention. You have a shot outside of that ball bouncing off of Trey McBride's helmet to take the division from the Rams and just go off with a blowout win in the final game of the season. I think, at least when you're talking about overall team pictures and grades entering the season, what we really wanted for the Cardinals was to be a solid B-. Be 9-8, be contending for the division. At one point, it looked like we had to change our expectation to an A grade. The fact that they kind of settled back down, I think, is part of why I'm giving that grade of a C+ overall.
Yeah, that I totally agree. That's exactly where I would do with not because I'm trying to copy your piggyback off of that, but that is really what you could say about overall grade C+. I mean C minus or a dead average C only because of the rankings. But I mean, where we come from, and every fan base has their own feelings and their own vibes about their own team. They could tell you a more accurate way of how their team performed because they're following them. They know what's being signed, who's coming back, what the team's direction is, where in their eyes they're supposed to be going. I mean, if you and I've heard this so many times, overall about the season. If you were being told you were going to have an 8-9 season, a lot of people would have signed up for that and said, wow, that's an improvement.
Yeah.
But then when we watch the games and we see things like, for example, the false hope of being 6-4, leading the division, and then thinking to ourselves, this is one of those circumstances where we have our quarterback out there. We have our team out there. I'm sure we do have some missing pieces that we want to add mostly to the defense and whatnot. But for the most part, this team should be aiming to contend for some sort of a playoff spot, if not for the division,
Agreed.
even though we're ahead of our schedule. But unfortunately, we, had our hopes dashed. We were talking about how great it was. And we even brought up how Kyler Murray was an MVP candidate at some point. That's how high the peak was. And then to come back down from that, we're just disappointed because of that. Just on paper, yes, we're happy that they doubled their win total, but we're kind of disappointed at the fact that they had a shot and they had it in their own. I mean, me and you talked about this time and time again. They had it in their own, they were the drivers of their own vehicle, and unfortunately, they drove it off the road instead of keeping it on path.
Absolutely. When we look around the NFC West, Marcos, it's a unique time because the Niners are approaching what seems to be a reset for their franchise. They have quite a few free agents next year in terms of guys like Javon Hargrave, Travarius Ward, even Dre Greenlaw is going to be gone. We're talking about some big cap decisions that they're going to have to make with a couple of guys. Their offensive line seems like it's doing fine. The biggest question marks, I think, for them are going to be, how much are you going to end up paying your quarterback in Brock Purdy? How is the health of Christian McCaffrey and the other running backs look? With the fact that Deebo Samuel probably gets cut and Brandon Ayuk is coming off of an ACL injury, does Ricky Pearsall and Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle kind of take off with carrying that offense? While on the defensive side, it's potentially looking at a Brandon Staley or even familiar face returning back from the Jets and Robert Saleh, who's not signed with a team just yet. You also talk about Geno Smith adding another year older in Seattle, while that defense seems to be coming along well. They fired their offensive coordinator. DK Metcalf is question mark. Tyler Lockett may be entering his final year as a Seahawk. We'll have to see how that goes. And they've just had a very inconsistent sort of run game and offensive line play. You talk about the class of the division in the Rams. It's going to be Matthew Stafford, Puka Nakua, if their line is healthy. The investment of young talent they've had on the defensive side, I think that's an example the Arizona Cardinals are going to probably have to look at of continuing to add to the well and get this defense built while Kyler Murray is at least on what is for most what you call franchise quarterbacks an affordable one. For those who are not sold on Kyler Murray, they may think that he's getting paid a bit much. But let's go and grade before we talk about some of this, some of the team, including what I would say is what we expected to be the strength of this 2024 Cardinals team, Marcos, the offense. So with anything, I think you have to start at the quarterback position, and this takes into account all of the position. I don't think that the backup should necessarily weigh down things too much. For example, if you're like, oh, the backup came in for a series and stunk, but the starter was great, you're kind of looking at in totality. And I think what we expected for Kyler Murray this year and what we got from Kyler Murray was something that it was one of his better seasons overall statistically. But when it comes to his career, it wasn't quite his career high. So we're talking about Kyler Murray's career high in 2020. He had almost 4,000 yards passing, about 800 yards rushing, 26 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. That includes missing, I believe, a couple of games that year where Colt McCoy actually and James Conner went off. He ended up with 21 touchdowns to 11 picks, ended up with just underneath 600 yards rushing as well. And I think when you're talking about the play on the field, what we saw, there was peaks that we saw, such as the Jets game. There was a great comeback, even times where you could say against the Buffalo Bills, he was under duress, backup linemen were in. He had throws that should have been caught and weren't. You also take a look at the other side, and there was just some struggles that hit where the Cardinals needed Murray to either make a play or just make a solid decision, and instead he turned the ball over to the other team in what was a critical time, unfortunately, for the Cardinals. And I think when you're talking about what you're looking for from the quarterback level, the standard that we've come to think from Kyler Murray, I think that I would be pretty comfortable in saying his grade probably is close to the Cardinals. I think you could slant it to either a C plus type of grade or a B minus from what we saw with the connection with McBride, some of the issues with Marvin Harrison Jr., and a little bit of injury to some of the offensive line. I think that you probably would have to say that it fluctuated somewhere between a B minus to a C plus pretty consistently. I think if you could wanted to, I would probably say give him a B minus. I know others who would probably give that a C plus grade on the season.
Yeah, I'm on the same boat with that, and it's actually interesting because I did I made a breakdown about like where he ranked against other quarterbacks and whatnot, and looking at those rankings, one of the things that I noticed with Kyler Murray, and it shows up on the film and it also shows up like on the stat sheet and whatnot, he inverted himself from being a person that throws outside of the numbers to just throwing in between the numbers.
Right.
So he excelled in that because of the fact that they had more play action. Obviously, that gives them a little bit more protection, and then he looks downfield to see his crossing tight end or his wide receiver running across the formation. Obviously, if you roll out, you're gonna dump it to like whoever's running that same direction. But like when he had to do a hard play action from under center and kind of go off his back foot and whatnot. When he's looking for those crossers, he got really good at being able to target those. So it was weird, and I wish they would release those heat charts already, because I can tell you that like the heat chart's going to be more like hotter through the middle and kind of colder to like the far side, because you obviously we know him as a Kyler Murray that throws outside the numbers and is able to like throw with his throw to his receivers who are going to win their one-on-one to the outside, and that's what we thought. Oh, well, that's going to be a strength, but the problem is his weakness is going to be targeting over the middle, which is why they don't allocate anything over the middle when they defend him. That wasn't the case this year. This year, throwing over the middle means you throw with anticipation. This time, he's hitting people on the crossers, and I'm like, that's difficult for somebody his size. That's for sure. So I would give him I'll give him a B minus because he excelled in a position in an area that usually was his weakness. I'll give him that because all he has to do is get back to throwing outside the numbers like he was before on those back shoulder fades that we always covet or the comeback routes, and then he has more of a complete game.
Yep. And that's something with Kyler also that we're talking about the quarterback play in general. We did at least see competent play for the most part. If you wanted to say that the outside was partially due to some inconsistency with the receivers or that the deep ball was an issue, I think that's fair. The Cardinals were also in pretty much most every game this season, at least, with Kyler Murray being able to help in some of those spots. Some games went their way, some did not. Think of the Chargers game, first of all, being one where without that rushing touchdown and the defense, they got their stop, but it took Kyler to have to drive them back down the field. I agree with you that you're wanting to see the complete play across the field from the quarterback. And speaking of at least complete, this is what we expected for a Marvin Harrison Jr. coming into the season. We did not actually see that complete receiver play. He finished with under 900 yards receiving. Tied Larry Fitzgerald as far as touchdowns went. We saw Michael Wilson, who didn't finish the season, be able to kind of have another 500 to 600 yard season. Zay Jones was able to get some play over the middle, especially I think we noticed down the stretch when he came back and was healthy. We saw pretty much nothing from Zach Pascal outside of some blocking when he needed to come in. And Greg Dortch, at least, was very interesting because this is maybe just seeing for how the Cardinals worked. They used so many tight ends during the season that when it took Michael Wilson off and his blocking off the field and put Greg Dortch in, the passing offense actually did a little bit better. He had 3 catches for 60 yards against the Patriots and then 4 for 47 in the season finale against the Niners. It felt like to me that this was an area where there was not as much consistency overall. There were drops that we got to see. There was not the production of the 1,000 yards that we were hoping to see from a Michael Wilson. It really felt like that none of these guys was the team's number one receiver. That route, of course, we'll go to a player we'll talk about in a second who's got a pretty high grade. But I would say that this is probably a C minus for the season because when you add a Marvin Harrison Jr., you're hoping you now can flesh out the room. You've got your number one target that's going to open things up for a Trey McBride. You're going to get one-on-one coverage for Michael Wilson. In passing downs, Greg Dortch is now going to be on the inside with some of that speed as well. We didn't really end up seeing that. We did, however, see some solid touchdowns as well as some of the wide receiver one traits from Marvin Harrison Jr., whether it was with some catches, some of the different comeback routes, especially with the over routes that he would run. There was a time or two that we got to see when he got those long running developing routes that crossed the field. He's able to find space evenly, some natural instincts coming back to the ball. I think what we can say, Marcos, is the Cardinals need another receiver. I think that's clear. I think they also need some of their current receivers to play better, which is why I would give them the C minus grade. I think the goal next year, it may not be an A grade necessarily. I think that would be if they exceed the expectations, but you got to want to be able to at least get to a B. And I think that they're going to need someone who's another veteran to come into this room from the outside.
Yeah, I will. It seemed like it was like a tale of two like halves with the wide receivers. So, obviously, with Marvin Harrison Jr. his development, I knew it was gonna be kind of a while before he even got himself going, and I had predicted that he wasn't gonna be the best or not the best receiver, the receiver with the most like yardage or catches or anything like that. I thought he was gonna be somewhere around like maybe just below like 1,000 yards if possible. And I'm happy with this production, mostly because he's only about 150 yards away from getting 1,000 like yards and whatnot in the season. And I think the expectations were just I get that he has a father that's a Hall of Famer and whatnot, but I think the expectations were just like way too high for somebody like him who I knew that when he was coming into the league, a lot of what was going to happen was they were going to get physical with him up front and they were going to not allow him to have any type of separation. And with that big body that he has, it is really hard for him to separate like right off the line of scrimmage. So
Yeah.
he was going to be somebody that was going to have corners draped on him. But when he got better at it was in the second half when he was actually being able to be better at separating, but also just being smarter where to settle in when he knows that he's facing zone. And with man coverage, he was like starting to like use his body in a way where like he's shielding the ball away from the cornerback. So for him, and I know Michael Wilson. I like Michael Wilson as a wide receiver. He's played physical since he's came to the Cardinals. He's somebody who's getting savvy with his route running right off the line of scrimmage. So he's somebody that I'm like I like what he's doing. Unfortunately, we couldn't get him involved any like more than we did this past year, which is kind of crazy because he got better with his route running. So with the wide receiver room all overall, and of course Greg Dortch disappearing like in the middle part, but showing up at the beginning and at the end
Mhm,
and showing exactly what Greg Dortch does, I would give them like a C or C plus.
mhm.
And I'm not going to blame it all on the wide receivers, but that is what they are production wise and what they showed.
Right. And one of the things I think that we can also talk about here is the way he was used. So he was out wide vast majority of the time as their X receiver. He was sixth as far as for go routes, where essentially we're talking about running like the 9 routes. They did not run very much pre-snap motion with him. And part of it, I think, is the Drew Petzing offense. If there was pre-snap motion that was input, it came from the tight ends moving around, or from there's times where we got to see them move Marv into the slot. But a lot of like how they used the pre-snap motion was different from some of the offenses this year. It was just we're going to leave Marv outside, let him win those one-on-one battles. And he ended up having, I think it was 18 targets when he had 3+ yards of separation, which is pretty low. When he did have separation, he was not targeted as much. He also had a hard time getting, like you said, some of that separation. Um, One of the things I think that's really interesting when you're talking about comparing him to Malik Neighbors is the athleticism is definitely a little different in terms of yards after the catch, maybe even like the pure speed. But the Giants were the ones who were kind of giving some of these quick short passes. There was no passes that were given to Marvin on the year behind the line of scrimmage in this offense. It was kind of where they were like, hey, if we're going to be using any sort of number one playmaker stuff, it's going to go to Trey McBride. It's going to go to James Conner. Marvin had his specific role, and I think that's something that I want to see for year two. We also want to see Marvin take that step forward. Some of the issues I think, like we can talk about, were that due to drops or some miscommunications, he probably was a 1,000 to 1,100 hard-yarded receiver who left a lot of those yards on the field. And that's something I think we're expecting to improve in year two. Let's talk about the tackle position here. For this one, I think that you have to probably give it a B. It's hard to give it an A grade because I think that they didn't have above average or superior tackle play. But when you talk about Jonah Williams going down for the vast majority of the season and then going down again, you talk about Kelvin Beachum having to step up and step in, and Paris Johnson really blossoming into a starting NFL offensive tackle. He's not one of those guys that I think is going to be like in the elite category. Maybe he takes that jump next year. But he is going to be in the category of very good, which is like maybe a couple Pro Bowls, get to that spot eventually. Probably a step above what we saw from DJ Humphries manning that left tackle spot for Arizona for years. Solid B is the grade that I think you would give here for the exterior of the O-line, Marcos. What would you say?
So for the exterior, I'd probably give him a B plus. It's hard for me to give him that A mostly because of the fact that like the uncertainty of the position, and I mean, Jonah Williams was fine, but I'm not really big on him. I think we may want to do something different about that, right side of the line. But I got to give it to Calvin Beachum, even if he wasn't like consistent when it comes to like being playing up to that level. He held that position down, so
Yeah.
I got to give him to him. And of course, Paris Johnson becoming a alternate for the Pro Bowl already in the second year. And even though we've already mentioned, like I wouldn't have gone that direction, but if you are going to go that direction, you want to get somebody that's going to be like a Pro Bowl type of person,
Yep.
and he's going to have a long, lengthy uh career. If he's already been seen as a Pro Bowl, like left tackle, then that's all you can ask for.
Absolutely. Interior of the offensive line. This is one that was a little bit different. I would say that this one for me is probably a C plus, and some of that I think is there was some great play that we saw from like Evan Brown and Will Hernandez. We saw the Will Hernandez injury kind of really hurt them a bit. I think that one of the biggest things we saw was they were a good run blocking unit, but struggled at times with pass blocking. especially in some of the games during the year. Once Will Hernandez went to IR, I think Isaiah Adams sums up some of that the best. You watch this awesome road grading block that he would make, and then the next snap you'd see kind of a whiff that could take place. To me, this is a spot where it feels like the Cardinals, if they are going to roll with Isaiah Adams for next year, you'll probably bring in another free agent or bring back an Evan Brown. Froholt at least has still been solid. He almost could lift up this interior of the line to a B by himself, but because of some of the issues that they had and struggles at times with depth, they got all the way down, I think, at least to offensive tackle 4 or 5 at one point, and got down to offensive lineman number 4 in there. And it's hard to kind of say like these guys are needing to be held to the same standards as a starter, but it's the NFL. When it's your turn to play, you need to play. I would say this was a C plus that could have been a B. It just barely kind of ended up falling a little bit short of that for me.
Yeah, unfortunately, Will Hernandez and that loss, it really sucks. I'm a big Will Hernandez fan, and since he held that right tackle position, it kind of like gave not right tackle, right guard. It kind of gave that right tackle the support that he needed because of the fact that we have people switching from that position. We don't have a solidified right tackle. We just have people that are filling in for that position. We're still trying to figure that position out. So that right guard is essential to not only be able to help out with things like stunts, for example. You don't have a good right guard, your stunt handling is going to be horrible, and that's
Mhm.
part of the game. You're going to have people that you're going to have like defenses, call their front with stunts, and you got to learn how to pass those on. If not, then your quarterback's running for his life. So, um, if it was for Will Hernandez staying healthy the entire year, I'd give this an A.
Mhm.
I'm gonna give him a B minus, mostly because of the fact that I'm proud of how this line did, and
Mhm.
I think that people I mentioned that the best position coach on our team probably should be the offensive line coach because he's elevating or helping to elevate a line like a group of like individuals who there's only 2 solidified spots there that have maintained their position the whole year. Paris Johnson at left tackle and
Yep.
Yalda Froholt at center. All the right, left guard, the guards, they're in flux. The right tackle, that's in flux. And we want it to be solidified. But for the most part, whenever they had to have somebody fill in, it doesn't look horrendously bad, even though there was a game where, yeah, it was pretty bad. But for the majority of the year, they did achieve what they sought out to do, run the ball well and pass protect well enough.
Definitely agree there. Let's talk now a little bit with the one position group that I think is pretty easy. Tight end. To me, this is an easy A. Trey McBride at least setting multiple franchise records. He still got his touchdown. We were looking for a pair of them at the end of the season. Tip Ryman, I think, is the one guy who, because he was a rookie, while we did see excellent play, we also saw some rookie mistakes. Elijah Higgins was able to catch some touchdowns, do the blocking quite well. To me, this is one of those spots where Trey McBride had such a spectacular year. I think that you're kind of having to nitpick with Tip Ryman and Elijah Higgins as to the only reason this wouldn't be a plus type of grade for the season. This is probably one of the highest grades that you can give to a positional group for the Cardinals this year, as this being the year that Trey McBride officially kind of blossomed into that superstar tight end.
Yeah, and I'm so happy that I stuck right by him from the very get-go. I remember watching his highlights when he was in Colorado, and I was thinking to myself, this guy's a stud. Because of the Cardinals, obviously their history with tight ends, nobody going over like 400 or 500 yards and whatnot. We had Rob Hauser, who was supposed to be that, hey, look, this athletic tight end that's a
Oh yeah.
playmaker, and then he comes over and he just one of the worst like tight ends on our team, like history wise. Tight end just wasn't good, and so it's kind of weird to be able to say, hey, the leading receiver on a team was a tight end and he's a beast. I mean, look at the highlights. They had the
Yep. Oh yeah.
NFL had to put the highlights on their own YouTube page because of how well he did, and he got snubbed from being an All Pro. In my opinion, I don't like. I'd say what you want about the tight end group and everything. He's ascending. He's not only a good pass catching tight end, he's also a run blocking tight end
Yeah.
as well. And he takes pride in doing both. That's what got me excited most of all. with him. So he himself is elevating this group. Tip Ryman, I would love to see more of a use check or like a
Hmm.
move type of tight end with Tip Ryman because he has the athleticism. He did bust out a couple moves after catching the ball for a guy who's that big. He reminds me of Zaven Collins. He's just like he
Hmm.
shouldn't be moving the way he moves, but he's big. So
Right.
if they do that and they have a 1-2 like pairing, of course Higgins is I love Higgins as well. Can't say enough about these tight ends. It's an easy A for me. It's just that's by far.
Absolutely. Following up with that, I would say that it's probably the same grade for me for the running backs. There were some games where it didn't seem like that the run was able to be fully effective. I think that some of that falls onto, like we talked about, the offensive line. Maybe you could kind of nitpick with some of the backs, but James Conner got his 1,000 yards. Trey Benson, while he looked lost to start, a lot of fans were like, oh, this pick is terrible. It shows that it does take some time. Trey McBride was nowhere close to being a star throughout his first season. When he needed to step up, Benson actually did help carry the rock pretty well and looked like he found his role on the team. You've got a couple of long touchdowns from Amari DiMercato. I think of the Chicago game, as well as some other big plays he was able to run. Maybe some pass protection questions with each of them that are in there, but you had a game that DJ Dallas put the Cardinals back into against the Buffalo Bills. And of course, despite being on the practice squad all year long, when he was needed, the Cardinals called up Michael Carter. He was able to be effective enough to be able to essentially show that it's a good thing they've got him signed for multiple years. He's going to be back next year, maybe even on the practice squad if he ends up getting cut in camp potentially. But he did at least showcase exactly what you needed to, which is a back who, when everything else fails, he'll be able to go out there and be able to run the ball for you on the route to a win.
Oh yeah, well, obviously the main focus of this offense has been like putting the run, obviously the running scheme first, and installing a good running game, which is a good thing. I know people get upset because of like, hey, there's not enough passing in this
Mhm.
offense and whatnot. Well, when you look at the playoff teams right now, all of them have either a top 10 offense or they usually run the ball more often than they do pass the ball, so their balance is higher on the running end.
Mhm.
And they excelled. So we all know that there's three parts to that. There's offensive line, there's tight end play with run blocking because those are going to be your pullers, your crack blockers. They're going to be your guys who are moving to take that one block that's going to open these guys for a big run and whatnot. And I mean, James Conner's he's the only Pro Bowl. Well, no, he's not the only Pro Bowler. I was going to say he's the only
Yeah,
Pro Bowler on our team. No, that's not true. But he is a Pro Bowler. So just by him and his play alone, it's going to obviously raise this up once again to an A. And this is probably the deepest group we have by far. Like
easily.
we're 3 or 4 deep. Yeah.
Yeah. Deepest since the Chris Johnson, David Johnson years, that's for sure. Before we go on to talk about the defense, I do want to point out with the backup quarterback in Clayton Tune, we did end up missing one because perhaps it was just so early in the year, but the Cardinals' overall quarterback's grade, maybe you could bump it down a bit because technically speaking, they were supposed to have a veteran quarterback and a third string quarterback to develop in Clayton Tune. Desmond Ritter did not work out, was released by the Cardinals, started only one game, didn't go very well. If you wanted to bump the group down as a whole, I'd say sure, that seems to be the one position where I think overall you're going to want to be able to have an addition next year of someone who's a veteran starter who you trust to be able to go out and win a game. We have not seen that from Clayton Tune. Fortunately, we haven't had to see that yet from Clayton Tune. But we did see some issues as far as in the preseason when he was having to go out and start. It didn't seem like it was great. Now, granted, backup offensive lineman will do that for you. Does not help the quarterback out that much. The defensive line does get a bit of a preseason advantage. Even still, we can move on to the defense with that. This is where it gets interesting. With the ends, Marcos, you're talking probably there's the outside linebackers. There's then going to be the defensive linemen, I think, going to be the ways to look at it. I think this would be the first probably true D grade that I would give, but I would probably say this is a D plus because we did get to see good play from Roy Lopez. We saw Kyrus Tonga and Daquan Jones had some production in sacks. Cardinals were not gashed up against the run like how a lot of people thought they would be this year. LJ Collier is able to make some splash plays. But really, what it comes down to is that Justin Jones and Bilal Nichols did not perform as well as they could. This is kind of an A for effort, but probably D for C plus at least at most for execution. It's not like to like say negative. It's just this is the area that the Cardinals need the most amount of talent in. This is also one of the areas they had the most amount of injuries. And like how it was with the offensive line, what positive that we got to see with some of those injuries did kind of decline a bit over time. Granted, we saw enough guys step up that I think that's part of where I would say I'd give this one the D plus. But at the end of the day, they were able to do well against the run. We're not able to get well enough against the passer for me to be able to get them that C grade, though. Marcos, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we need a desperate infusion in this group, and it sucks because like they did go out there and they played as well as they could.
Yeah,
And we were asking
did their
quite a
job.
bit because of
Hmm.
the fact, yeah, then they had to do their job because if not, then it would have been a lot worse than what it did. So you're right. I did see a lot of effort. I saw a lot of effort plays. I saw a lot of them just not, even if that talent is down here, they're actually like playing above what they should be talent wise. It's hard for me to give them a like I would settle probably on a C minus just for the effort
Hmm.
part, but the fact that the
Yeah, I can
injuries
see that.
they brought it down too much. Like the injuries, they just it's and plus, like I said, it really needs a talent infusion.
Yeah, it does. As far as the um, outside linebackers, injuries also playing a part here. You lost the guy you're expecting to be able to step up for the entire season in BJ Ojolari. It seemed like the Cardinals were going to be okay with Dennis Gardeck having multiple sacks, having the interception in the, I believe, the Lions game. Saw some flashes, at least at times, from Xavier Thomas and Victor Dimukeji. But really, I think this is probably a C minus grade, and that C minus is mostly bolstered by Gardeck's own effort to start the year and Zaven Collins being a beast in terms of run defense. He even was able to get a few sacks, but the Cardinals were not a team that really were able to have a big sack leader. They were not even able to rush the passer as well. The blitzing that the coaching staff was able to do, and when we're done with this, we'll be able to kind of do a basic rundown of the offensive, defensive, and head coaching candidates, as well as the some of the GM for those grades too. It really just feels like they do not have that Batman type of pass rusher like a Chandler Jones that we've had in the past, who is at high level, needs to win a rep, go out and get it. They have a couple of guys who showed up as a Robin type this year, for the most part, being Gardeck, who's a free agent, Collins at times. I think that if they get back BJ Ojolari, add another player, and then maybe you can hopefully hit on someone, that will be something that's consistent. You were able to see some from Dante Stills, but of course, that's in the defensive line role versus the linebacker type of role that we're talking about here, rushing off of the edge. Marcos, what are your thoughts, at least as far as for the Cardinals? Because it seems a little bit strange. Like, I almost feel like I would say that the defensive line, as far as for the talent compared to the production, probably outperformed the edge rushers this year. It's just they get a little bit, I think, of a lower grade in part because of some of what the expectations were for a Justin Jones and a Bilal Nichols going in.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I'll give this group a C minus. Once again, part of that's because of Gardeck and his injury, but when he was out there, they didn't use him as often, but he was effective at getting some pushback. Um Ojulari is the biggest like unfortunate of this position because
Yeah.
for one, aside from his brother like showing that like he has some ascension, Ojulari himself having those long like 33-inch arms and or 34-inch arms and whatnot, he could have played that role of being that Hassan Reddick for the Cardinals,
Yeah.
because they have somewhat of a similar type of build, especially except for the fact that Ojulari has long arms and whatnot. And I heard from like I was listening to what Michael Wilson was saying, and he was saying that in like he was pretty confident if Ojulari was out there, he would have had 10 sack season. So
They had
because
high
of
hopes
that
on in
loss, it
camp.
brings it
Hmm.
down. But
Yeah.
I think next year is going to be kind of exciting when we get him back.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a critical year for him. Year three always is for pretty much any guy who's on a rookie contract. I think that this is one also of those positions that, like we said, it's an A for effort type of position because you're talking about how the production was. You kind of have to vary the kind of objective, what you're seeing on the field, and the subjective. I think that both of them ended up being like comparable enough in this regard. There's a lot of work that the Cardinals schematically were able to do with Nick Rallis, and one of their position groups that I think was able to give a boost to that as well. For the middle of the road, I'm going to say that the inside linebackers, you're talking about the Will linebacker in Kaiser White and the Mike linebacker in Mac Wilson, who was one of their third down pass rushers. I think this is one that's a solid B. They did their job in terms of this scheme. Maybe you could say that they didn't have a star or a huge play that popped up, but there's not really that much to complain about. Ultimately, they were fine in coverage. Kaiser ended up being the main run stopper, while we got to see Owen Papo and Chris Barnes kind of did a bit more in coverage. This is one of those places where I think you just don't want to overthink it a bit too much. Maybe if the Cardinals can get a star there, you'd like to see more, but with how Jonathan Gannon has schemed up stuff in the past, where he really has found like fifth round linebackers, veteran free agents, and been able to get good production, I think that is probably just solid B, accomplished a job. Don't need to think about it more than that.
Well, I think I would go like B minus, mostly because
Mm,
I like what Mac Wilson brought. So Mac Wilson, he was a stud in my opinion. And we've all think a lot of people have mentioned that like that he's probably the best signing that of this past year, and it wasn't even close because of the fact that every other free agent just didn't look like they busted or they just didn't look that good out there. So Mac Wilson really gives me hope, and you saw him. They put him on the edge. They also had him obviously being in like manning, being one of the hook droppers in
mhm,
their zones and whatnot. I think what so this is my guess. I think part of the reason why they let Kaiser White go is because they know Mac Wilson can also call the defense.
mhm,
They might want to shuffle Owen Papo in there because of that athleticism. He's a
mhm.
good blitzer, so they think he might be a playmaker in that aspect. His coverage isn't all the way up there, and Kaiser White's coverage, unfortunately, was I think what was detrimental. There
Yeah.
was times where I saw him
Yep.
covering a wide receiver that was already being covered or having some sort of confusion,
Mhm.
but he knew how to call the defense, which is why they placed
Yeah.
him there. So
They
now
tried to leave
that
him out of coverage as much as they could, where he was usually
exactly,
either blitzing or on the run stop. So a lot of times, what I would see is Cardinals at least don't have as many edge rushers on here, but it's going to be on second down. You're able to use Kaiser and Buddha in different places to be able to fire one or both of those guys off to be able to actually put the defense into an advantageous position with the offenses in third and long. That was part of where we were able to see the Cardinals get off of the field at times. But like you said, there's the fluctuations of how Kaiser's role changed from kind of being that Mike linebacker who made up a billion tackles to being used a bit more. And I think that, like you said, there was a bit of exposure in coverage that did pop up. That's why I think that it's probably a fair grade to be able to give. We didn't talk as much about Baron Browning off of the edge. I think that he's one of those guys that you can see about bringing back. But the cornerback room for this year, this one's interesting, Marcos, because I don't think I can give them an A grade, but I don't think that I can say that they were anything lower than probably like a B minus. I'd love to give them a B plus for the most part. You got to see some good stuff from Max Melton as a rookie. You got to see at least overall as far as Starling Thomas make some plays. But Keitrell late in the season when he actually did have to play, did I think have like either the fumble recovery or an interception. We also saw at times that the corners were not necessarily in the best spot. A Sean Murphy Bunting was a good example for each of those there, and they didn't play three corners as often. The other thing, of course, is that what really elevated this group was Garrett Williams having a like top five, top six caliber season as the nickel corner. Just was fantastic in terms of shutting guys down. To me, this is one of those spots where I'm like, can't give them an A, but I will give them a high B plus, and I think that it's just a little bit holding them back from being that solid A grade here.
yeah, I have to go with the. I'm not gonna go B minus because of Garrett Williams, like he himself,
Mm,
and like I don't understand the shuffling of like these players around because Garrett Williams was drafted as an outside corner and Keitrell was drafted as an inside corner, and then you kind of shuffle him around, and because Garrett Williams plays position so well, and he's almost like it's insane how good he is in zone coverage, how well he understands it in his second year, and he's playing the apex role, which we mentioned before. It's a hard role to take over.
Mhm.
So Garrett Williams playing so well, he's keeping Keytrell on the bench, unfortunately, and then Keytrell only gets his opportunities if Garrett Williams gets an
Mhm.
injury, like, or he has to walk, be out for a game, or if you have to push him outside, which is what happened when, in the last game of the season, Max Melton was injured. I believe Sterling Thomas, like, they were so high up there, they pulled out Sterling Thomas, and of course Sean Murphy Bunting got
Mhm.
himself pretty much. So it gave
He
Keytrell
got
that
beaten, but he
opportunity to
got that
come in.
interception in the last game too, so it kind of
He
was
did. Well,
interesting.
they both did. The Sean Murphy Bunting got himself an interception too. So I mean, the defensive backs, yeah, I'll give him a
They
B.
were, they were good at least. Moving on with the safeties, it had a top tier return to form for Buda Baker. A lot of his playmaking also, instead of having the two safeties back, was enabled by having corners who could play kind of those deep roles, such as having Garrett Williams being able to play like, and sometimes he would slide over to that center role, so Buda would be able to um, fire off, whether it was on some of these different fire blitzes or being able to rush the passer. Like, there was a lot that you're able to do with Buda Baker. We got to see some playmaking from Dadrian Taylor Demerson. We saw sometimes he just didn't quite have it there. This is one of those spots of where, for Buda, like you said, you could probably argue that between Buda and Garrett Williams, that would be an A grade. I think with this one, from what we've seen, I've seen enough that I would probably say I'm a little harsher critic. I'd give this one a B plus two. Just feel like, at least with Buda being able to have the season that he had, a few more interceptions from Buda would have probably pushed it over the top for me. I think that the solid secondary, whether that's going to be, B positive, A minus, whatever you want to call it, that helped make up a lot for those guys in the front seven where quarterbacks couldn't throw. It gave guys time to get there in the pass rush. And that's where I think that when we take a look at how these grades work as far as in a vacuum, you really have to assess and can't just say, yeah, the defensive line did great. You have to recognize that's some of the product of how well their secondary did play overall. So I would give that another B plus, only because I think, at least if you wanted to say give a grade for the secondary overall, I would say probably the A minus B plus type of range is where I would be. Your thoughts, Marcos, on the safeties and Buda Baker, who is, of course, locked up and going to be an Arizona Cardinal for the foreseeable future?
Oh yeah, this is easily this is I believe this is the strongest group we have on defense, and yeah, their coverage. I believe their coverage played better than what the expectation was. Than obviously rushing the passer and whatnot. And Buda Baker is just like he's just a godsend. Jalen Thompson is not too far behind as far as being a good starting type of safety. And then we have Dadrian Taylor Demerson right behind him, who showed in his little minimum snaps that he can do the type of stuff that we can see from Buda Baker or Jalen Thompson. So this was by far their strongest group on defense. We had their leader, which I will always say Buda Baker is the true leader of this defense. He's the guy who gets everybody energized. He's the guy who makes the plays. And even if there were some off plays where people can say, well, you know what, number 3 got exposed on that one. You know what, number 3 is our playmaker on our defense and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some situations that I don't even blame him for. When it comes to being in coverage one-on-one against a 6'5" wide receiver that runs 4.3, that's not his fault. He does whatever he can, but this guy takes it to he knows how to storm the alley better than anybody I've ever seen as a safety.
Yeah, he is an all-time Cardinal. At least it's great to be able to see that. The special teamers this year, Blake Gillikin ended up getting injured. Michael Pilardi came in. Matt Prater also got injured. So Chad Ryland took over. I would say that this one, because it's hard to be able to measure fully, because Ryland came into a tough spot. He had multiple game-winning kicks. There's also some kicks that were probably going to keep the Cardinals in the game that were missed or blocked. I would say that this one, at least for each of those, when it comes to the kicking game, the punting game, the holding game, I think that you'd say an overall B. It accomplished its goal that it needed to do. There's maybe some disappointment. We saw enough from Chad Ryland that he's probably going to be getting a shot next year with some competition in camp. If he had nailed some of those field goals, of course, then we're talking about an A for this group. But the future looks pretty bright with Blake Gillikin and Chad Ryland. As far as for punt returning, we got to see a kick return touchdown for DJ Dallas. And a decent amount of punt returning from Greg Dortch. It'd be fun to see if the Cardinals could be able to have something electric, or be able to find other ways to be able to get Dortch onto the field as a receiver versus just as the punt returner. But overall, I would say this is a solid B. It could have been disastrous when you're losing your starting punter and starting kicker for the season. Arizona had a few issues, but was able to overall weather the storm. And this is a group that, if they improve, could be an A grade for next year.
Yeah, we got very lucky when it comes to like losing both of our punter and our kicker, and then be able to replace them with people that we're confident with. Chad Ryland kicking some game-winning field goals for us, absolutely stud when it comes to that. Unfortunately, he wasn't consistent when it came to some of the other kicks. So it seems like this guy needs to kick further back, and then he'll make it. And if he misses it, it's because he's too close to the field goal post. Blake Gillikin, I all I care is him pinning. Like, I just want a punter to be able to pin people down and not just kick it out with the new system that we have in place. So, like I said, we got lucky, and I'm glad that that's exactly what happened. When you lose both of them and you replace both of them, you have a bright future with them. I'd give him an A just based on that, because it's not easy to be able to like replace the special teams, like your punter and your kicker, and have confidence in them going forth. Obviously, I'm not giving them an A as in like, oh, you know what, they're the better group ever. No, I'm just giving them an A for the fact that they were able to like give us the confidence to replace that position and not worry about it anymore.
For sure, yeah. Gillikin actually, this is kind of what's a bummer about how his season ended. But if you're talking about pure, as far as for net average for punts, for being down, he was having one of the top seasons in the league, just outside of that top five or that elite category. This is part of where, between him and then some of the kicks we were seeing from Matt Prater being used as a weapon, Cardinals seemed on track to an A grade. There was a couple of problems with injuries, of course, that did take place. They came back and were able to finish with a B, which is really, you can't ask for more than that from young players, especially one in Ryland, who, while we've seen issues before, he had a disastrous rookie season. He showed that he could stick around in this league, and that it's never going to be as clean or as clear as we think it is. I will say also, when it comes to the kickoff returns, DJ Dallas being signed, he does seem like he's a good enough weapon that you are going to have to respect him. The fact that, like you said, the kickoff rules probably need to get adjusted a little bit more is going to be helpful, and I'm very curious to see just exactly how that goes for the Cardinals moving forward. All right, let's talk about with the coaching staff now, Marcos, because this is the last step that I think we have, which is head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. And as far as it comes to these, as far as I'm concerned with Jonathan Gannon, there wasn't as many areas as far as for whether it's time management, timeouts, clocks, leadership, whatever you want to call it. You probably would have to say that the Cardinals were getting a B grade this year. We're going to be probably seeing people question about some of those, but I think that also comes with the head coach who does represent the team as a whole, but they can also be separate from their team of having to overcome or make some different areas. If you wanted to say a B minus or a C for how the season went is a reflection of the team as a whole, I think that's fine. But what I would say underneath is we probably got to see what I would call an A grade from the defensive coordinator, Nick Rallis, and a C plus from what we saw with Drew Petzing, because there was enough issues with the passing game. We saw a strong run game. I think you can't just give him a B minus and say that it was good enough. Maybe you could. I think between the two, we'd love to see next year if Petzing's able to get that passing offense going. I think you immediately can say, nope, no B grade, just goes straight to an A grade there. That's where I think it kind of evens out when it comes to the coaching staff. There was a lot that I think that we were able to see as well in terms of adjustments, where the Cardinals, I think, in some degrees, seem primed to have an explosive season next year, which could mean that they lose one or both of their coordinators. So that would fall on Jonathan Gannon to kind of keep up with finding that new play caller and being able to kind of keep this cultural reset of the Cardinals going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sorry about the cat. Yeah, she wants attention. Anyways, so I'm a little higher on. Well, I'm higher on the offensive coordinator than a lot of other people would be, mostly because I did see that creativity. It can be out there. It would be interesting to see what he could do if he's given like the head coaching reign. So the rumors about him taking on, like the interviews with the Chicago Bears and whatnot. I think that would be a good spot for him to be sent to, not because I want to like, hey, this and that. It's because once you have a different offensive coordinator move on, and we have the problem being highlighted of the passing offense being the issue.
Mhm.
He came over and was able to construct a really good run game to be able to have better support for Kyler Murray. Even Kyler Murray himself says that he doesn't have to, he makes that remark about him being Superman and whatnot and run around
Mhm.
this and that. Well, that's because the run game's really supporting him, and then being put under center, and then you know uh, playing the way he did under center and embracing like having to snap the ball from under center, hit the back foot, and then find the receiver down the field. I think those are the type of stuff that you have to credit both him and the offensive coordinator and being able to work together on. Yes, would
Mm.
we like to see better when it comes to like passing stats? Yes, we would. So I'd give Drew Petzing a B minus. I'd give defensive coordinator Nick Rallis an A because of the fact that the group that he's working with, as we know, he doesn't have the certified studs at every position that you need to be able to get this defense to play the way they did. But they did some amazing things against
Sure.
teams they had no business doing, especially like the Detroit Lions. The
Mm.
Detroit Lions and shutting them down in the second half of
Yeah.
of the game. That's miraculous right there. And like I said, you ask the average Cardinal fan which group was outplayed their positions or outplayed what they were at, you'd hear the defense. So obviously that comes from Nick Rallis and whatnot. And mm, my gripes that I have with Vance Joseph, it's a breath of fresh air to be able to see a different defensive coordinator install a different philosophy. And his creative blitz packages. He
Mhm.
Obviously they're dead even when it comes to blitzing, but they are creative because he's not trying to bring him from the line of scrimmage. He's trying to confuse quarterbacks, and he does a really good job of doing that. Head coach, I had to give him. I would say it's just a B because even though Jonathan Gannon to me, there's some things that he does that I don't agree with and I don't like, and there are some things that he does that I will say that I do like.
Hmm.
But one of the things that I do like about him is he is loyal when it comes to his staff, and he also is composed when it comes to being on the sideline.
Right.
You can see him lose his marbles sometimes or get mad in certain calls, but he does keep that composure on the sideline. It irritates me sometimes, but at the same time, he's just trying to show the team that like, hey, like you got to maintain your composure, and we haven't seen anything crazy from these players, with the exception of the San Francisco game. And from what I understand, he does come down hard when it comes to situations like, hey, don't lose it and make your team fall back. I mean, we were the least penalized team for quite a couple of weeks and whatnot. So that's something that does come back to discipline.
Absolutely. That's something that we'll be watching for sure as it comes through with each of them and with Petsing for next year as well. I think when it comes to head coaches, and this is maybe just my personal take on some of it, there's always going to be coaches that are going to get an opportunity who are top offensive coordinators. There's always going to be coaches who are top defensive coordinators. There's always going to be kind of former retread head coaches who've done it before. You kind of have to have like, it's not like Space Jam, like at Michael's like secret ingredient, secret sauce, whatever you want to call that. Jonathan Gannon feels like a guy who's got the sauce when it comes down to with how he responds, reacts, also with how guys follow him. Like there were players who were like on a Super Bowl winning Philadelphia Eagles squad that he basically was like, "Hey, I'm going to here." Nick Rallis just picked up and followed him, and the Eagles were like, "Wow, okay, like we were really hoping that you were going to be our defensive coordinator for the future." Being able to have Petson follow from a good running game with the Browns to kind of follow over, and then, like you said, building a top 10 offense. All of that, I think, at least, is something that's good for the future. Now, at least with talking about the other part, at least, which is the general manager and ownership portion, this is going to be what goes under Michael Bidwell. And I think with each of these, you're probably going to be talking about an improvement. I think with Monty Austin you can't just say that he knocked it out of the park with the draft class, because we've seen this year's draft class not quite pick up the same as last year's had. But we still see, I think, improvement. We've seen at least that, in my opinion, he's been capped. There's probably more moves you'd have liked to have seen to get the Cardinals over the top of this year. I think we'll see how it looks at the end of 2025, knowing this has been a 3-year rebuild for the Cardinals. We'll get to judge it a bit better then. Michael Bidwell also, in terms of the drama, in terms of the bad publicity, you're talking about the Cardinals with their facilities being given like for an F for player, for having to pay for meals, for not having stuff for the kids that players had. He boosted stuff enough to kind of get it where it's competent. There's also some fans who are going to look at that and say, didn't really change the same way around how we had hoped that he would. They took out some fan seating for some cabanas, which, while it will help in terms of money, is definitely going to be kind of that more pushing toward the elite fans versus the people who make up the vast majority of your fan base. Between each of those together, I still think that it accomplished its job. I would probably say this is a B minus. You'd hope that it could be a B minus as kind of an optimistic grade. Maybe in reality you say it's a C, but considering where the Cardinals were, considering where they're at now as far as for perception, like, you don't hear about them being crazy with all of these interviews. You don't hear like, oh, no one's going to want that job like how it was with the Jets. There's stability within the Cardinals. And I think for that alone, it accomplished its goal. It still has a little ways to go, but I'd give them a B minus for the job of Monty and Michael for this year. Marcos, how about you? Or you think that they should be separated? Maybe we should look at Monty this way and Michael Bidwell this way.
Honestly, I would want to separate him because I have like when it comes to ownership with me, I've had a gripe and my issue with Michael Bidwell, and I understand there's some things that he does push forward, like when it comes to being a leader with other like owners and stuff, when it like inclusion and making sure that when it comes to like being more like acceptive of like every basically racial relations is what I'm trying to get down to. He has pushed to be one of the leaders. Unfortunately, with the reports that came out, kind of like soured that. But I do know that he does have a good relation with his players. I know that for a fact because Kyler Murray had a mural painted with all the Cardinals as a gift to Michael Bidwell, knowing like if you have that type of relationship with your players because you want the best for them and whatnot, then he shows that he truly cares for them. At the very least, I can give him that. I can't give him anything else other than he does, for the most part, want to treat his players well. He does see them as family. I'm not sure why the Jet was such a big deal with that, because of the fact that once he did buy the Jet, unfortunately, when we started coming down as a team, but he did that because he didn't want, he wanted to be one of two teams out there that had their own personalized jet. So he did spend big money when it comes to that. When his facilities when it was criticized about the facilities, there were some things that he did change. So, and of course we see him when he hosts like the Super Bowl and whatnot. He plays the role of a host because I mean Glendale is a good spot for the Super Bowl. So that's that. So general manager Monty Ossenfort, I would say I don't agree a lot with what he does with the draft, but I cannot argue with the results. His drafting is way better than Steve Keim.
Yeah.
It's just his. So I'd give him an A on that. Needs to get better on the signing, so I'd give him a free agent signing or in free agency when it comes to spending or when it comes to like going after that A list, that A type of player, or for example, Zach Allen and Byron Murphy. Everybody thought we were going to retain them, and we just let them go on free agency. And I'm not sure what kind of offers or deals we gave them, but we could have tried harder to keep them in house. So because of that, I'll give him a B. I'll give him a B, but that's way higher than I'll ever give Steve Keim. So that's for sure.
Yeah, I think with Keim, he had his heyday. There was times where I think that with Rod Graves was the GM, but Steve Keim was essentially the scouting director who was helping with that process and making picks. It's interesting, through 2 years, Keim, I think, has found more star players, and some of that is just he was in the role for 10 years, was with the organization for 20. Like, you can pick out at least with the, obviously like the Patrick Peterson, and then looking at even previous years, the Darrell Washington fine had hit. Calais Campbell and DRC were all ones that were previous to like what we had seen, because that was all like the Rod Graves time.
That defense.
Yeah, he did construct that defense, and part of that was, some of those players like Calais and Darnell were still around, but He hit on a superstar player in Tyrann Mathieu in his first draft. They had a good player in terms of Deion Buchanan, found a John Brown who for a while seemed like he was going to be a superstar and then just never got there. They found their longtime offensive tackle and pass rusher and DJ Humphries and Marcus Golden. And even when it comes to superstardom, they did find a Buda Baker. What's really funny is the last few drafts for Steve Keim, while we complained about them, you take a look at the issue was kind of a combined issue because you had like you told someone, hey, here's what the Cardinals got in their last couple of years. They got Hassan Reddick and Buda Baker in the same draft. They got Christian Kirk, who at least has played solid, while then you talk about the last year you got Kyler Murphy, excuse me, that's my name. Kyler Murray, Byron Murphy with Zach Allen. And then you talk at least about how it just seemed like it all fell apart after that. 2020 draft with Isaiah Simmons over the Trackle Wirfs, over a CeeDee Lamb, with the second rounder pick going for DeAndre Hopkins. They went all in. All of those moves, at least that they made, got the team to where they needed to be in 2021. But with the aging veteran players and injuries, they did not really have those depth picks, and they don't have guys from any of those draft classes. Rondale Moore, Marco Wilson gone. Cameron Thomas, Myjai Sanders are gone. Hollywood Brown's no longer with the team. It was just one of those places. And then you talk about Zaven Collins, at least, has not been a star, but you found Trey McBride along with Buda Baker. So I think with what we're seeing with Monty Ossenfort, it's more solid overall drafts, but it's missing the star power. Whereas with Steve Keim, he could find that star power that would keep it around for a while, but he would have inconsistent drafts, especially in later rounds. And they wouldn't have a plan for some of those guys in how they were going to play. So I would agree with you that it's something really interesting to look at is what we talk about with a Monty Ossenfort moving forward. Can he find one of those star players, or does someone become a star player in the next year or two? Let's wrap up here today with going a little bit over some of the free agents as well as Cardinals cap space. So Cardinals, for those at least wondering, they are top 4 in overall cap space in the NFL. In terms of effective cap room, they're still also 4th. They have spent about $204,000, but there's a cap room at least that's going to be going up all the way of $272 million this year. It means that the teams that are ahead of them are the Patriots in a total rebuild around Drake May with $112 million. The Las Vegas Raiders, who are also in a rebuild, we'll see it happens with them and Max Crosby this year, considering the fact that he's probably their most valuable player. He's under contract. He's 27 years old, and they're going to be probably having to go under a 1 to 2 year downturn. We'll see who ends up taking that job. The surprise Washington Commanders, that one team that turns around behind Jaden Daniels, are also having a good amount of cap room. But this really is going to be the year for the Cardinals. You kind of bit the bullet in 2023. You didn't do a whole lot in 2024 so that you could be able to be aggressive in 2025. We'll have more that we'll be able to talk at least about the Arizona Cardinals when it comes to what they could go out and acquire as far as for other extensions that they have. But we're going to take a look at the free agents that they have for 2025. And where that really would normally start with, you probably would say it's Kaiser White and Will Hernandez. Reason why that is because you don't got Buda Baker on this list anymore. He's been extended. You don't have James Conner on this list. He's been extended. To me, that already is a good thing, Marcos, heading in, because a lot of these guys, we can at least say, are probably not going to be even close to the impact that a Buda Baker and a James Conner would have been, regardless of if they stay or go.
I mean, yeah, that's exactly what we needed to take care of. So yeah, it is good to not see Buda Baker on that list, and I mean, just the fact that we got like more of our free agents like out there that we are planning maybe to retain. Like Will Hernandez is one of the ones on top of my list. I think he's very important. I think he's a must. But I'm not even sure what the talks about him is because of the fact that we have Isaiah Adams apparently showing some sort of ascension and whatnot. But that is a long list, and I didn't realize how long the list was until you just showed it to me just now, because of the fact that I see players that I believe that we should retain. But seeing how this franchise has been operating, especially since they want to operate more of like, hey, we're just going to bring him in through the draft and we're going to supplement them. Who knows what's going to happen with this situation? But Will Hernandez, and yes, I get Kaiser White's on top of that list. I think they do plan on moving off from him. I think Will Hernandez should be on top priority. Kelvin Beachum is an interesting one. I would love to
Mm,
still keep him because of his ability to be able to fill in whenever you need to, whenever one of our tackles is out, or whenever we in necessity, there he is. He's solid as a rock. And Baron Browning, I want to see him
yeah.
once again, give him a shot. Greg Dortch, I want to see him back, but the problem is that it's so complicated with our wide receiver room. Even if he was let go, I don't want to see him go, but he might want to seek other places just so he can get his bag.
Yeah, and that's one of the areas I think with Dort. Now he is a restricted free agent, which is good. So that means that it's more likely than not that he'll be on the roster next year. They're still going to have to probably see about how they tender him. The others being unrestricted free agents, I think, would be what I would be more interested in. I agree with you, and that the biggest name that stands out for me here is Will Hernandez because he's 30 years old. That's going to be kind of the age where you see some guys have good careers from 30 to 34 on the offensive line who can be anchors. Can also, like you said, is this the time to hand the ball off to a younger player, bring in maybe another veteran? Is there another team that could get more out of Will Hernandez? And how does that recovery go for him? Those are all things that I'm not quite sure of. I think it's one of those places of where if you're going to talk about extending a guy who's down three here, the top two you've already extended. So now it's do you want to keep those guys or to let them walk? And I think with Kaiser White, like you said, 29-year-old linebacker signed a 2-year deal. I've seen enough from Gannon and Rallis that if they're letting him walk, they'll be able to find a replacement and potentially even an upgrade. We forget that Kaiser was let go by the Eagles originally. With Will Hernandez, I think that's a keep. Prater, obviously, to that, that's a let walk. The one that's the most tricky to me is Dennis Gardeck. I think that you basically can get him on a minimum deal because of how his injury was late. He's coming off of that. He's 31 years old. He's a very valuable member that you have of that. If someone is going to pay him more for that injury, I think that's fine, but it's one of those places where he probably would have gotten a much bigger payday had he been able to stay healthy. So just the timing of that is rough. The one guy I think that I could see extending for another year, like you said, is Kelvin Beachum. Now we get to probably some of these key players who have spent time there. I would say that with Evan Brown, I would probably let him walk and try to look at a different veteran lineman. I think you could bring him back. But it's one of those places of where you kind of sometimes end up shuffling through, and there's enough times that he struggled, especially against the Seahawks and their defense. You're probably going to have to need to make a bigger investment knowing that you've got a lot of the interior pass rushers now on the Rams and Seahawks are in your division. I think you let him and even a Zay Jones walk. You probably need to get another receiver. With Joe, we talked about how unless you're going to go out and get an Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State, it's going to have to be a veteran, and there's not great options in the veteran wide receiver market this offseason. I don't see the Cardinals chasing a T. Higgins when the New England Patriots could just basically back up the Brinks truck for him for a Drake May. I think it's pretty easy to say some of these defensive linemen like a Kairos Tonga or Roy Lopez are guys you can at least talk about pretty easily bringing back. And that brings us to at least probably the three last names we'll mention for our show today. Aaron Brewer, the long snapper at 35 years old. Baron Browning, the edge rusher at 26. And I would say, I think that the last one I wanted to talk about, at least here, was a little bit lower. Oh, yeah, Jesse Luketa, the edge rusher. I'm really interested to see what happens with Jesse Luketa, especially on the free agent market, because Roy Lopez, to me, he's a guy that I don't think you let walk. I don't think his value is as huge as others are. I think you have to keep him. I liked what I saw from Baron Browning, but it doesn't feel like he's a starting level. Similar with AJ Collier, who's now 30 years old. I think you can probably do a bit better. That leaves you with a longtime veteran and Aaron Brewer and kind of that guy who's done a lot of it and is still young in a Jesse Luketa. Do you think that these are guys that should stay, or could the Cardinals do a bit better and let some of these guys go?
I think Baron Browning, I would like to see him stay. Dennis Gardeck, I definitely think he should stay because he brings more than just value at edge and whatnot. Jesse Luketa is interesting, but I think I would just let him go. I haven't seen enough to be able to say like, hey, like this guy's going to be a big major loss. He has shown that he does have like the prowess, or not the prowess, but like the just the hustle That's what I'm trying. That's what I was trying to
Yeah,
say.
he's
This
got
dude's
that
hitting us up.
hustle that's there, and that's where he's a restricted free agent too. I misread that. Sorry, as far as the if he was restricted or unrestricted, so he's more likely or not to be back. So you're talking about your Roy Lopez, your Naquan Jones, and your Aaron Brewer of the unrestricted free agents that the Cardinals could potentially see walk. Last name to talk about here, Victor Dimukeji. This is one of the hard ones because I think that the room that you're talking about for the Cardinals and the need for edge rush, I think it's going to push him out, which is tough because for a fifth or sixth round pick that he's been a pretty solid player whenever he's played. He's also been able to get after the quarterback when he has on the limited snaps he's had. He played about 14% of the snaps this year. That one's going to be one of those ones where if the Cardinals wanted to give him a Dennis Gardeck type of deal for the next 3 years, I wouldn't have an issue with it if they let him walk. I don't know if I'd have an issue with it either at the level of play that he is. Their linebackers for Arizona, Chris Barnes is also an unrestricted free agent. They're going to have to bring in another linebacker or two in this year. I think that you can keep Chris Barnes and at least have that consistency, but I could see Victor Dimukeji then having to pay the price and walking as a result. Any final thoughts, at least, on some of the other free agents that we're seeing here on our list, Marcos?
I think we pretty much covered it. For the most part, we covered it all.
Absolutely, we did. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Hey, this has been the Redbird Reboot Podcast. We'll be back, at least hopefully, with a guest next week, and then have a quick look at our free agency preview. Who would we target? What would the amounts be? Anything else we'd see with the Arizona Cardinals? We'll also be able to hopefully talk a little bit about the NFL Draft next week. It's something where the Cardinals have all of their picks this year. It's going to be very exciting to see. This has been the Redbird Reboot Podcast, and hey, you know what, guys? You've just been rebooted. That means it's time for us to log off. Have a good one, everyone. Have a wonderful start to a 3-day weekend, and go Cardinals.
See you guys.